So
Act
crazy.
like, my mom always says, act like you belong.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. My name is Deborah Jewell-Sherman, and I am the Gregory R. Anrig Professor of Practice in Educational Leadership here at HGSE. It is my pleasure to welcome you to what promises to be an energizing and inspiring Askwith Forum. For those of you who are new, the Askwith Forums are HGSE's signature public lecture series. The forums highlight leaders in the field, share new knowledge, generate spirited conversation, and offer insights into the highest priority challenges facing us in education. We are delighted that you have joined us today here in person and via live stream, and we hope you will join us for future Askwith forums. I'd like to begin by introducing our extraordinary speaker for this evening, Dr. Janice K. Jackson. I concur. Dr. Jackson has been immersed in Chicago public schools her entire life. She was a CPS student, teacher, network chief, and chief education officer before coming into her current role as CPS's chief executive officer. As CEO of the third largest school district in the country, Dr. Jackson is responsible for setting the district's collective goals, ensuring that the children of Chicago develop into thinkers, leaders, and innovators of the future. Dr. Jackson is focused on providing students in every neighborhood of the city with equitable access to high-quality programming and facilities, and she is committed to developing a pre-K through 14 continuum that is steeped in academic rigor, supports the well-rounded development of the whole child, and provides students with multiple pathways to success. Dr. Jackson is focused on improving equity and access to high-quality education in all of Chicago public schools. Her 5-year vision for CPS, which she unveiled in 2019, is a comprehensive, research-based roadmap that strengthens the district's commitments to academic progress, financial stability, and integrity. Dr. Jackson's vision is grounded in her own work, teaching and leading in the district. After spending 5 years in the classroom, Dr. Jackson served as the founding principal of Al-Raby School for Community and Environment. After Al-Raby became one of the district's most successful neighborhood high schools, Dr. Jackson was selected to open another high school, George Westinghouse College Prep High School, whose success has been recognized nationally due to its thriving world language program and partnerships like the Northwestern Medicine Scholars Program. A lifelong educator, Dr. Jackson is committed to providing all schools with a framework for excellence. She holds a master's degree in leadership and administration and a doctorate in education and policy studies in urban school leadership from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Not only does Dr. Jackson lead Chicago public schools, she also lives in Chicago with her husband and 2 children, both of whom are CPS students. Dr. Jackson is a servant leader who is deeply invested in the continued transformation of her beloved Chicago public schools. I am incredibly excited to join you all in learning from her this evening as she discusses life in Chicago public schools after 30 years of education reform. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Janice K. Jackson.
I like the initial. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. You're too kind. Thank you, Dr. Jewell-Sherman, for that kind introduction. And it's my pleasure to be here today to address future leaders, our nation's future leaders about this important topic, public education. My leadership team and I had the opportunity to work closely with some of the faculty and staff here of this incredible university, and I can say wholeheartedly that it had made a tremendous impact on us. As a lifelong educator and learner, I've always valued the time spent with folks like you who are perpetually curious. Many of you here tonight will go on to drive progress for our nation's schools and set policy that will impact the lives of many of our students. And before I begin my formal remarks, I want to offer a statement, not advice, but just a statement that I hope that you carry with you through my talk today. I'm very intentional about saying I want you to drive progress, not change, because that's a really important point to make, because this work is extremely difficult and hard, and there are no silver bullets. Tonight, I want to tell you a story about 30 years of transformation in Chicago public schools, highlighting some of the reforms and the actions that took place in order for us to be able to tell you this remarkable story. Public education is something that's near and dear to my heart. We know that public schools offer our students, our families, and generations to come and generations before us the possibility to have the lives that we all cherish and want here, and sometimes refer to as the American dream. I want to tell you a little bit about my experience here in Chicago, but before I dive into that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the progress that we've made and about myself and my experience. So if you take a look here on the screen, and I'm sorry if you can't see it, we did send some of these materials ahead of time, and we'll make sure we send them as a follow-up. But essentially what you're looking at is the 2019 academic report card for Chicago Public Schools. And if you look at this, you will see a compilation of data points and metrics that tell a similar story around slow, sustained progress that we've made in Chicago Public Schools. You will notice that we have improved graduation rates, freshmen on track, but we've also made it a point to highlight the growth that we've made with regards to establishing arts programming in our schools, as well as the scholarships that our students have attained during their time in CPS. Chicago Public Schools has been able to boast about tremendous academic gains, and this is a district that looks very different than the district that I was educated in decades ago. When I was a student in CPS in 1987, then Secretary of Education Bill Bennett said of Chicago Public Schools that it was one of the worst school systems in the country, and that it would take a man or woman of steel to clean it up. 3 decades later, thanks to deliberative progress and work over the past decades, Chicago's teachers and principals, with the support of both the private and philanthropic community, are now able to stand out as national models for what can happen in a public education institution. It's not just about the metrics, but we do think that these are critically important as they tell a story about the progress that can be made when you champion reform and support for students in a very intentional way. Professor Reardon of Stanford, who I also understand graduated from Harvard, somebody told me I had to say that, was conducting a meta-analysis on student performance throughout the country. And his work was not focused on Chicago public schools. In fact, he had no connection to CPS. But in that, what he found is that students in CPS were outperforming 96% of the students in school districts throughout the country. What he found is that students in CPS from grades 3 through 8 were earning 6 years or learning 6 years of instruction in a 5-year period, which put them on a path towards outperforming other districts. I'm sorry. And I want to be clear, because sometimes when people hear this metric, they automatically are skeptical and also start to explain away what Professor Reardon is pointing out. I want to be clear that he did not say low-income school districts. He did not make a distinction between the demographics of the particular school districts or the governance type. He looked at all public school systems throughout the country, and CPS for growth was at the 96th percentile. Coupled with that, Karen Chenoweth at the Ed Trust, who studies public education in districts and does more of a qualitative approach, also has remarked on the progress that has been made in CPS and stated that if we're serious as a nation about wanting to improve schools, we should be studying how Chicago has made that progress. Now, of course, a lot of this information became national headlines, and these were things that we knew already in Chicago and had been examining. But of course, we've been put in a position to explain the transformation that is happening in our district. Finally, and I'll talk a little bit about this before I jump in, we also have prioritized the role of school leadership. And we've had several journalists and others come in and take a look at what Chicago is doing, because as a large school system with over 360,000 students in 660 schools, we do not believe that you can lead from the district level. We have empowered our local school leaders, and we believe that the school is the unit of change. So I want to talk a little bit about how we were able to get here. If you look at this map, this is really just a distribution that kind of points out what I talked about earlier, which shows that CPS students are outperforming their peers nationally. And if you look at this, what you see that's remarkable along the axes is that you see CPS is kind of along this continuum on the bottom, where we have about 80% of our kids are low income. But what's dramatic is that you see this red bubble popping out at the top, showing that Chicago Public Schools is outperforming many districts that are actually more affluent and in some cases should be performing better. We also highlighted Winnetka, Illinois, for those of you familiar with Chicago, which is one of the highest income areas in Chicago Public Schools. And if you look along this axis for growth, CPS is almost identical for one of the most affluent school districts in the country for growth. So the story around how our school system has changed is extremely complex, and I don't purport to be able to answer that by just talking about these three items that are listed here today, but I do think that they played a huge role in the transformation of Chicago Public Schools. First, I'll start by talking about school choice. Chicago Public Schools is one of the largest school choice districts in the country. We were creating and expanding programs before people were debating about whether or not school choice should even be a thing. And I oftentimes like to share my personal experience, because I grew up in a family with 4 other siblings, and my parents were exercising school choice before it was a thing. We all went to our neighborhood elementary school, but my father believed that all of us deserved something better than what he thought our neighborhood high school could offer. And as a result, every single one of my siblings attended either a magnet or selective enrollment school across the city. If you fast forward today, we have created a system where parents who are you don't have to be a parent in the know, or a parent who is just going to work as hard as my parents had to find quality opportunities for our students. We have made this process more simple and accessible for our students. Earlier today, I was interviewed by someone on campus, and they asked, what is the most, what are you most proud of in your role as superintendent? And I actually talked about the Go CPS system, which is our universal application system. I believe that this application system has made the process less opaque and more transparent. And as a result, parents have an option and they have a choice that in the past was reserved for our more affluent families. Another critical component, I would say, to the CPS transformation story is accountability. Now, I know sometimes when people hear the term accountability, especially accountability with a capital A, people cringe. But if you look at the story of what's happened in CPS, we've actually created a system by which our schools are measured not only on student attainment, but also student growth and performance over time. We also have an amazing partnership with the University of Chicago's Consortium on School Research, who has unfettered access to student performance data in CPS, and oftentimes share information with us that is then transformed into policy for the school system. It is important to recognize that educators are the drivers of progress in the classroom, and they deserve the credit for the gains that our kids have made. But we also want to make sure that we acknowledge the critical role that our building principals play in this story, because they have had the autonomy as well as the accountability to make decisions that we believe have led to this success. We also rely heavily on data in Chicago, another word that can be cringeworthy. We believe in being open and transparent, and I oftentimes joke that we count how many times students sneeze in Chicago. That is not true. That's not true. I just want to be clear. But we do believe that it's important to have open and transparent access to school data, because this brings about the level of accountability that's sometimes not present in some of our low-income communities. Our relationship with the consortium is unprecedented, although I know many school districts are looking to replicate it. When I talk to school leaders from across the country, some of them marvel at this relationship, and some of them also worry, how is it that a school system could trust sharing its data with an institution, not knowing what kind of research may come out of it. But we believe that the greater the transparency and the deeper the analysis, it has led to transformational changes in our school system. One that is most notable is Freshmen on Track, which I think many of you have been studying in your program here. I remember being a principal 15 years ago when we first started looking at Freshmen on Track as a district. It later became one of the metrics that we look for in our school accountability policy. And what we were able to do is organize our schools around supporting students at the 9th grade, because the data in the research showed us that students who were on track after 9th grade were 3 times more likely to graduate in 4 years. And as a result, we saw more of our students, because we intervened early, more of our students were on track after 9th grade, resulting in a higher graduation rate across CPS. As a school leader, I know many of you have aspirations to lead schools and school districts. One of the things that I think is critically important is that you have to have a vision and a strategic plan for moving this work forward. I believe that it's your role as the district leader to provide that vision and roadmap, and it's important to create that along with the folks who will actually be doing the work. If you look at the vision for Chicago Public Schools, it's really encompassed here in this diagram, or this apple that you see. Academic progress is our priority. We are an academic institution, and improving outcomes for students is critically important. We also believe that fiscal responsibility and financial equity is extremely important, and I'm happy to take questions about that later. And finally, integrity. When we first committed to these 3 principles in 2015, I had to really fight hard. At that time, I wasn't the CEO, to include integrity as one of our core components. And the reason this was critically important to me is because I believe collective impact is necessary in order to drive the type of change that you'd like to see in the school system. But I also knew that we had a problem, in particular in our district, where we needed to restore public trust in the institution. As I introduced this new vision earlier this year, we also added a key component, this component of equity. And I want to talk a little bit about the focus on equity in Chicago Public Schools and what this means for us. This is not a term that we're using because it's the trendy term or something chic to say. We're now looking at how we allocate resources, how we measure school quality and accountability, and to make sure that we are not perpetuating some of the same inequities that exist in our district. I fundamentally believe that talent is evenly distributed, I should say, but opportunity is not. When I draw on my own experiences as a student in CPS, I know that many opportunities were afforded to me and my siblings because of what we brought to the table. If we're really serious about equity, this means that we have to make sure that all students are provided with the same opportunities, no matter their zip code, skin color, or anything else that they bring to the table. But we have to be strategic about this. It can't just be something that we think about as an afterthought. So when we opened the equity office last year, one of the things that we prioritized was creating an equity framework in a lens and a common language so that we can talk about this as a school system. And as we make decisions about resource allocations, capital improvements, and where new programs will go, it would all be done through this lens of equity. This school year, we built on some of those investments in our budget by making sure that we added more social workers, nurses, and special education case managers in the schools that need them most. Through legislative changes, Chicago Public Schools has received additional funding from the state, which is a huge battle that we face in Illinois. Illinois is actually 50 out of 50, according to the Ed Trust, for funding public education, and 49 out of 50 for funding education for low-income students. But we had a remarkable achievement a few years back that led to us receiving more funding from the state. All of those new dollars are invested in a much more equitable manner in our school to ensure that the schools and the neighborhoods that need it most are receiving those resources. Finally, as we think about equity, we have to talk about teacher diversity and some of the challenges that we face in CPS and in the nation. Research tells us that teacher diversity is important for student success, especially for children of color. So CPS is determined to recruit more teachers of color. In our 5-year vision, we identified a goal of hiring 3,000 African American and Latinx teachers by 2024. We've also started to work with our students to encourage them to think about teaching as a profession. We've targeted potential educators in high schools, looking at predominantly African American, Latino, and predominantly African American and Latino high schools, and we created a career and technical education program for aspiring teachers. Students in these programs will take coursework aimed at helping them become future educators and supporting their path to and through college and hopefully becoming teachers. These are a mix of short and long-term strategies that we're employing in CPS in order to bring about the next wave of progress for Chicago Public Schools. In closing, my goal for Chicago Public Schools is simple: to create a world-class school system for a world-class city. We believe that there has been remarkable progress that has happened in Chicago Public Schools, but I have said publicly that I won't be satisfied until we narrow the opportunity and achievement gap for students of color and our diverse learners in CPS. We must celebrate the diversity, improve school quality, and establish the kind of transparency that is needed to build trusting relationships between CPS and the families that we serve. These are my major priorities for Chicago Public Schools. It's not a humble list. I hope I have enough time to do it. But it takes a certain level of confidence and perhaps a little bit of crazy to say that you want a world-class school system and tackle all of these problems in a city like Chicago. I hope that you've learned a lot about the remarkable transformation story that's happening in CPS and the challenge that we have ahead. I thank you for allowing me to share my story, and I look forward to learning from the outstanding young leaders in this room tonight. Thank you.
Everybody should have a Sadie. Do you want to introduce her?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Sadie is my deputy chief of staff, and now I'm embarrassed. I'll just hold on to it.
Thank you so much. I think it's still acting up, so he'll try to fix that from the back.
I can just use my teacher voice. So.
But they need it for the live stream and for the recording.
All right.
30 years. Two quick questions before I get into some of the prepared questions. And after we have a conversation for about 30 minutes, we're going to open it up to questions from the floor, and I'll give you some instructions about that. Choice. That made a big difference in the lives of you and your siblings. What does that look like in Chicago Public Schools? Is it charters? Is it other kinds of
It's
choices?
a lot of things. Chicago Public Schools, I think about 15% of our kids are educated in charter schools. So there's definitely a lot of options there. But when we talk about choice, we're also talking about a variety of programming that we offer our students. And so that may be an IB program, a selective enrollment program, a STEM academy. So there are a variety of choices that students have in our school system that go well beyond to be quite honest, what was offered to me as a student, which was pretty much a selective enrollment or magnet school or your neighborhood school.
Okay. And you talked about the way that parents can access this information and that it's no longer determined by who you know or what you know or how you know how to navigate. Can you talk about that
Well, we
system?
probably wouldn't say it was who you know ever, but some people might say that. But seriously, the old process probably included over 150 different applications, different deadlines, different hoops, requirements. And so as you can imagine, the families who were able to navigate that and understand that and create a system whereby they could apply, meet all the deadlines, get the letters of recommendation. There were so many different hoops, which I can see some of your faces. You're thinking like, is this college or high school? We're talking about high school, in some cases, some of our elementary school programs. And so one of the things that we did is we examined the policies of every school. In some cases, we had to change things. For example, there were schools who would select students based on behavior and things like that. So that's something that they can no longer do in CPS. But then we created an online system. So now families have to fill out one application. It's very similar to the common application for college that many of you may be familiar with. And the reason I think that this brings about greater equity is because all of the options are there. And we also include information about school quality so that parents are making choices, not just based on schools they might be familiar with or proximity, but they're also making choices based on quality.
Okay, great. 30 years, as you have pointed out, is a long time, and this transformation has been underway for a while. What are some of the biggest challenges that you can share with us about that journey in 3 different ways, with teachers, with administrators, and with engaging a disengaged community?
All of those things are interconnected, but I'll start with probably the biggest challenge today, and then maybe some more things will emerge. Chicago, despite some of the changes that we've talked about and the positive changes, one of the thing that keeps me up at night is the issues that we are experiencing as it relates to enrollment. Chicago, at its height, probably had over 500,000 students, and now we have actually more schools than we had in 1995 when we have over 500,000 students, and we only have 360,000 students. For the past 3 years, we have lost about 10,000 students each year, and that is because I would describe it as kind of a perfect storm or convergence of a few things. First, legal and illegal immigration has slowed dramatically in Chicago since 2016. Birth rates are extremely low in Chicago and in Illinois. And then also we have seen a large or mass exodus, I should say, from the south and west sides of Chicago, which are predominantly our African American low-income communities. And, we haven't done a robust study to assess that, but we know that some of that may be people transitioning to go to, communities or suburbs that are right outside of Chicago that they deem safer, which is something that is really a challenge for me. And when we first started to see this trend, it was really troubling because it started with, principals kind of pointing out a few principals that I know on the west side where kids and families were transferring to school systems that were not performing at the same level of CPS, but many of the parents were transitioning because they wanted safer environments for their kids. And so the enrollment is something that's a huge issue because while we're constantly, creating new opportunities and thinking about how do we, stay above the curve to make sure that there are diversity and options throughout the city, we're also experiencing population loss. And so that's an area where we have worked directly with the community. We put together 2 years ago, the most comprehensive data set called the annual regional analysis, where we looked at school quality, school choice, patterns, all of this, and we made that data available to the public, which is something that we hadn't done before. We would look at the data, come up with the plan, take our beautiful plan, so we thought out to the community and get, they would address us. And then, we would have to kind of fight back, and it just didn't create the right dynamic. And so because this is a huge issue that affects everybody, the approach that I took is we're going to put the data out there for everybody and really just embark on this education campaign for people to understand that the high school, your beloved high school that you remember with 2,000 students now has 300 students. And what does that mean when a school is designed to have 2,000 kids and you only have 300? And so I think we've been successful in engaging the community where when we first started, people were like, this is a school closing plan. Here we go again. Everybody knows the history of school closings and CPS. And what ended up happening is people saw that we were really trying to have a conversation about what's happening. We led with investments by creating more academic programs in certain communities, in certain schools within the communities hardest hit. But really got to a point where people were like, all right, we understand something needs to happen, but they're like, you need to probably close a school, but not my school. So that's kind of where we are today. But the way I explain it to people is it's a simple third grade problem. We have fewer students than we had 20 years ago, and we have more facilities. There isn't a marketing or recruitment plan that fixes one school without hurting another school if you don't have the students there. Mm-hmm. And so that is an example of a huge challenge that I'm trying to address by engaging various stakeholders.
You shared that safety was a concern for some of the people that were leaving, choosing to leave. How are you addressing that?
Well, I think schools are anchors, and I think when I look at the issues that we face with regard to violence in Chicago, the way I approach that is, I'm not a police officer. I stay in my lane, but I believe that that the schools play a critical role in making sure that we educate children and give them choices so that they don't have to turn to, other things. And so my motivation is to educate as many students as possible and give them opportunities so that they don't have to make those choices. But we also want to make sure our schools are quality. And I hope that, and I think this is the case, that there are some families when they're making a decision, they may, wonder, like, is it worth moving to a particular area that may be safer if I'm not going to get the same quality of education? And the school can kind of be a pull factor or an anchor that keeps them in that community. One example is the work that we did recently at Inglewood High School, which is something I'm incredibly proud of. We just opened that school this year on the first day of school. And this was one of those tough decisions that I made about 18 months ago and was probably called every name under the sun. But we closed 4 comprehensive high schools that, in their heyday probably had about 6,000 students. And at the time that we closed it, there were less than 300 students across the 4 schools, less than 400 students across the 4 schools. And this was tough because, these schools had existed for a long time. But what we said is that we have to close the schools. 93% of the people who live in this community are going somewhere else, and they are traveling the furthest distance than anybody else in the city. They were traveling almost 5 miles a day to and from school. So when you start putting that information out there, we made the decision. It wasn't an easy one, but one of the things that I thought was critically important is that you can't take away something from a community without giving something back, and it can't just be Chromebooks and programs. It needs to be real. And so creating a state-of-the-art school. So we walked back into this school, we were expecting 300 freshmen. They have over 400 freshmen, which is a good problem. But this is the same community that 2 years ago, 93% of the students who lived in the school-age children that lived in the community went somewhere else. And so I'm looking to replicate that across the district where we address this problem in collaboration with the community, but that we lead with investment, because otherwise you're just taking something away. And communities are accustomed to that, which is why they don't trust school systems and other government institutions.
Yeah, we don't often hear about investing in.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, everyone in this room, or at least all of the students in this room, are preparing to be just like you.
Oh, really?
To think that 15 years ago, was it 15 years ago you were a student or a principal?
Oh, no, girl, I wish I was that.
Which was it?
I graduated from high school in 1995, so, yeah.
So this is wonderful for everyone in the room to
yeah.
think that,
Yeah, but I did have an accelerated track, if I'm being honest. I taught for about 5 years. I became a principal very young. I was the youngest high school principal in CPS history. I was only 26 when I became a principal.
Wow.
And that happened as a result of starting a new school. So back to that choice piece where I started a new school. It wasn't a charter school. It was a school within the district. And so what I also like to share with people about my story is that I've worked within the school system my entire career. And oftentimes when people start thinking about change, they don't believe that you can innovate within the school system. But I think that I was able to be entrepreneurial within the system, and there are constraints and barriers there, but I just want to make sure people know that you can go and work in a traditional school system and do things that are creative and innovative. You don't have to go and start something else. But yeah, so that's that. But I spend most of my time as a principal.
Which is wonderful. I mean, that's encouraging for people in this room who would like to be on a similarly accelerated fast track. Who were some of we heard about your parents. They sound like they were wonderful influencers in your life. Who were some of the other influencers and supporters? Did you always want to be in education?
I actually wanted to be a college professor, so that's my goal. And one day,
I'm moving.
Yeah, one day. I always tell people I wasn't like a weird high school person saying I want to be a school superintendent, although I had a couple of students who used to tell me they wanted to be principals. I was like, who says that? But I initially wanted to be a college professor, which was also a little weird coming from the south side of Chicago. I didn't know anybody that was a college professor, but I've always loved history, and that was my original pathway. But to be honest, I went to, I had great schools, great teachers, and was given every opportunity. And I say that not to brag. It's actually something that is embarrassing at times, because I think about what that school system was like compared to what we do today. A lot of the policies we have are universal, where we try to offer things to everybody. But the way I was educated, people picked and choose who got what. And that probably was because me and my siblings were well behaved. We were reading before we came to school. We did, you know what I mean? And that system where the kids who show up and do everything that they're supposed to do and act right and speak well and they get opportunities, and parents that are involved. My father was crazy, for real. But, we were picked for everything. Yeah. And so one of the things that drives me is bringing opportunities for everybody, because there are a lot of girls from the South Side who can be CEOs, but it takes the people in power and in charge to see things in them that they may not see in themselves.
I agree. We know, yes, we agree. What brought you then to K-12?
K-12, I started teaching, and so my goal was to go back and get a master's and a doctorate in history and teach at the University of Minnesota. And I don't know why, only because I knew somebody. That was the thing. Okay. But that's how kids, when you don't know, you just know. I knew one person who was a college professor there. But once I started teaching, it became painfully obvious really fast that what the students in the school where I was teaching, what they were experiencing was very different than what I experienced in CPS. And honestly, I thought something happened. I would remember talking to somebody like, something happened to black people, like something's going on, what's going on in this school? And I remember the person was like, no, you just had a different experience. This is what's going on in a lot of schools in CPS. Like, you had a different experience. And so I am the type of person, I don't complain about stuff. If I see something that's not right, I try to change it. And so I started looking for ways to do that. And part of it was trying to do a better job teaching. I think I was an okay teacher. But then there was an opportunity through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to start a school. And that really took me off my professor track, because they basically, gave an opportunity for people to put together a proposal. So me and a group of teachers, all of them just as young and bold as I am. We only had one senior member who told us we were crazy every day, but that's why we kept them around. We wrote a proposal to open a school, Al Raby High School, which was named after a former Chicago teacher and civil rights activist. He was like the Martin Luther King of Chicago. So we named the school after him because it really embodied what we wanted to teach the students there. And that was and I became the principal of that school. And so that was really the place where I decided this is where I want to be. And when I filled out my graduate school application, I wrote that I was going to be the CEO of CPS before 40 or by the time I'm 40. And that's exactly what happened.
Woo!
Yeah. Now, I'm going to be honest, when I wrote it, I was just trying to be bold and stand out.
Okay.
And my professor still, who's a mentor now, he still remembers that, and he never lets me forget that.
Okay, well, there are some of us in this room, I certainly am one, who believe that you put it out into the universe, do everything that you know how to do to make it real, and then just walk into it. And obviously, that's what you have done. I also say things like, I'm scared of her. In the best way.
I love
it. Best way. So you talked about, is Jody around? So Jody or somebody has to keep me on track for time. Just give me signals. But you talked about excellence and equity and diversity, and we talk a lot about that here at the Ed School. Can you give us some examples of what that looks like on the ground in day-to-day activities in your school district?
I'll give you an example. I will say, especially for those of you who are going to lead districts, this work is hard and it takes a long time to get it right. And we have an amazing person as our chief equity officer who will probably be the first person to tell you that he didn't know how heavy this lift would be. But it's really important to have a framework and a common language around this because people hear different things when you say equity. And so we have spent the first year figuring out what that actually means and creating that framework. But in the meantime, there are things that we can do every day to change that. And so one of the examples from a district level was our capital plan. Okay. So each year we spend roughly $500 million. In some cases, it's been close to $1 billion on capital improvements in our district. And when we looked at our plans for the past 10 years, of course, every ward, I'll use wards as an example, receives some kind of capital improvement, so schools in various wards. But when we start to examine and go deeper, we saw some inequities that existed there. The example of the Inglewood that I talked about was one where they had not received a brand new high school facility since the 1970s. And so there were examples like that. And so part of it was when we think about our capital program, the first thing we look at is making sure that kids are warm, safe, and dry. And that takes up a majority of the money because a roof is very expensive, HVAC very expensive. So you can spend a bunch of money that nobody sees really fast. But then we also prioritize overcrowding relief, which in Chicago, I just talked about the mass exodus, right? So if we're relieving overcrowding, we know that is not in the Latino community as well. And so those things needed to happen. There are real issues when you're looking at the entire city. But one of the commitments we made is that we are going to prioritize the communities that had not received capital investments over some of these other priorities that were kind of higher on the list in years past. And so that's one example. So when we allocated, I should say, the funds for this year, it was done in a much more equitable way and mirrored the demographic makeup of the district much more than I would say prior capital plans did.
Did you do work to prime the community so that they would understand the shift, or?
Yes and no. I think the change with the mayor helped because everybody was clear she was coming in on the equity agenda. Okay. We do engage the community when we create our capital plans. And there are still some shifts that are occurring. You know, there are some people who, are accustomed to the overcrowding relief being the top priority, which it is. These are serious issues. But we also have a very, we have a responsibility to take care of our infrastructure. We have an aging infrastructure. The average building in CPS is 75 years old. And so we've just messaged like, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And just been much more transparent about how big the issue is. And so it's not perfect. Another example is around ADA accessibility. We had not prioritized that outside of, in Chicago, I don't know if it's probably federal guidelines. Whenever you do a renovation in a building, you have to make it ADA accessible. So we would do that for any kind of renovations, but we had not earmarked any money outside of that. This year, we have total about $600 million in need, and we earmarked funds to start chipping away at that. And so that's another example of where we looked at a need based on providing equity for our disabled peers and partners in the school system. And so that's just another concrete example of how we're trying to think about things in a different way and prioritize people that I feel like have been left out or disenfranchised in some cases.
And communicating, being transparent seems to have helped.
Yeah.
This area, I'm really curious about, and that is politics in Chicago. It's known for being a city where politics plays a major role in every part of community and civic life. So can you share with us how you've been able to build rapport and bridges with major players like mayor, ward leaders, teacher unions, and other community stakeholders?
Well, that's going to take up the next 45 minutes, but Chicago, you are right. Chicago is a very political city, and it's fun. I will say that. But I will share my frustration, as I shared earlier, that I am sometimes uncomfortable with the amount of politics, particularly as it relates to public education, because I know it's the nature of being in a large city, but I also reject that because I know in suburban areas, parents just would not stand for that. And I just feel like when we're dealing with poor Black and brown students, why is it okay to politicize every single thing that's happening with them? It's just a problem that I have with it in general. But how do I navigate it? First, accepting that it's a part of life and that it's my job. I say to aspiring superintendents, I said it to a group earlier today, if you don't like politics, you're going down the wrong road. You can't lead and you won't buffer the people who you're serving if you don't engage and pay attention to lowercase and uppercase politics. It's just a reality. And people, depending on who you are, politics has a negative connotation, and so people are uncomfortable with it. But the way that I think about it is I think about relationships, and that's what's critically important. You have to have relationships with elected officials. You have to have relationships with community leaders, faith leaders, the union leaders, in order to do your job, because if you are in charge, people are looking at you to do certain things in order to make it easy for them to continue to do their best work. And so I think communication is critical. I think what you say in private needs to be the same thing you will say publicly. One of the things that I've shared with people is if I'm having a conversation similar to the conversation we just had about school capacity or enrollment, I've seen leaders who sit in certain spaces and say certain things certain ways because of who's in the room. And my conversation and dialogue is the same. Now, of course, I'm going to make an adjustment. If I'm in Harvard, I might say it one way. If I'm, in Inglewood, it might be conveyed a different way because I want to reach the people. But the message is the same. The integrity matters, and people pay attention to every single thing that you do and say. And that's a shift that I've seen people who kind of are elevated sometimes don't pay attention to. What you say when you're the superintendent is very different than what you say when you're a teacher or even just a person on the superintendent's team. And so being attuned to that is critically important because it really impacts what happens for the people that you serve.
Being a homegirl, has that helped you understand the politics in Chicago?
I think part of it, my father was very not involved in politics, but followed politics closely. And so we talked about stuff. I'm not joking. He said Barack Obama was going to be the first Black president. He said that. Barack Obama was a state representative in the district that we lived in, state senator, I should say. And I remember him doing, like my father coming home. My father was a cab driver. He was like, I saw him. He was doing a speech on 87th and that boy, woo, woo, woo. He said that. And so, he read 3 newspapers. We would talk about the council council wars, for those of you who know about Chicago politics. So we talked about those things. So I think I was pretty astute, but it wasn't, I wasn't a poli-sci major like my brother and, a political junkie then. But I understood the dynamics, and I understood power and how that is exercised in a way that I think most low-income people from communities where I come from just don't understand. We feel it, right? We feel the effects of not having power, but don't really understand how you secure it and use it. And so that was something that we talked a lot about in my house. And so I was probably a little more comfortable in some of those, dicier situations than maybe other people who want to avoid the messiness that's involved in it, that's inherent in it.
You also, Dr. Jackson, talked about people in community leaving because of safety, and I wanted to just give you a chance to talk to us about ways that you're addressing what actually happens in community that often spills into our schools.
Well, one of the best programs that I think we've instituted to deal with safety outside of the school is the Safe Passage program that started about 8 years ago in CPS, or 7 years ago. And now fast forward, the people who work in our Safe Passage programs live in the communities where they serve. For a lot of people, it's an opportunity, a second chance opportunity. Many of them, almost all of them, have a deep sense of pride serving in that program, because they are not only there to they're like crossing guards, but they're also like moms and aunts, and they observe the students and sometimes observe things that maybe the teacher or the principal didn't see. It could be something as simple as, kids not having the proper clothing to, deal with the weather, or observing dangerous things that might be happening, and being able to report that. So that's one thing, that's one way that the school system has contributed to public safety. We also have done other programs in our schools, like BAM, I think is a really important program, Becoming a Man, and we have a program for women working on womanhood, where we work with our students, in some cases, some of our students that have been exposed to trauma, some of our students that have either been victims of violence, in some cases perpetrators of violence, to really sit down and talk to them and work with them. We have other programs where it's, kind of like behavioral therapy that we've done in the schools that have been really, really powerful. This summer, we had a program called Summer for Change, which we are going to extend year round, where we identify 400 of our most at-risk students, and we worked with them. They received job training and a stipend. They received therapy through the group behavioral therapy with professionals in our schools over the summer, and they also went on field trips and had other opportunities for exposure. And first of all, we had more students in the program than we anticipated. None of the students in the program were victims or perpetuators of any kind of violence throughout the summer, which is why we're looking to expand that to more students, because it's what we all know, that when you invest in them and you give them an opportunity, you give them, employment opportunities, you give them the support that they need and the access to professionals, if that's something that they can, that they feel that they need. And we're seeing a change. And so this is an initiative that our new mayor instituted, and we would like to expand throughout the city of Chicago, because again, we have to make sure that we're really supporting our students and stopping the cycle early. I think that's the place that the role that schools have in the whole public safety issue.
In the class that I teach, we've talked about collective impact, and this seems like a collective impact model. How have you engaged partners in this work? Obviously the mayor, but just others.
Well, the mayor is definitely a partner, but every program I just talked about, there are partners who support the work. So the working on womanhood in the BAM program is through youth guidance. We work with the Chicago Police Department and some of the programs that we talked about. We work with a host of community-based organizations. So One thing that I think is important to know about Chicago is people are really connected. And when I talk to folks in other school systems, I think that we really enjoy a lot of support from the philanthropic community, our community-based organizations, the universities in our city. They all, I mean, it's a lot. And so that's one of the things that I'm really proud of. We have a lot of people working on this. I don't think you can do this in isolation. And you shouldn't do it in isolation, because the more you can relieve the pressure on teachers who are unfortunately left to do these social workers, nurses, and all these things, if we can really leverage those partnerships in the community and in the other institutions in the city, it gives teachers the space to do what they've been hired to do, which is to teach.
I'm going to, on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a few more questions and then I'll open it up. Lots of aspiring superintendents and school leaders at all levels in this room. Can you share with us, we'll just make it two things that you think they should do to prepare themselves for their job, their future job?
Well, you're in a great program. So I think you're already getting kind of the technical experience and the part of the job that's going to help you to be successful. I would say just spend time learning who you are as a leader. I think the most powerful professional development I've ever experienced is professional development, where I had to examine who I am and how I show up. And I know sometimes that feels fluffy and like people feel like that's, that's not the real work, but it really is. Sometimes we don't know how people see us. All of us have blind spots. And so when you learn who you are, all of those assessments, I know we've all taken various assessments, pay attention to those. But more importantly, when you start managing people, make sure you spend as much time understanding them, because how you treat them and interact with them has a huge impact on how successful you're going to be as a leader. So I would say get to know who you are and be confident in that. I have seen a lot of leaders, great leaders, and also leaders that have struggled. But the one thing I will say is if you are a leader and you lack confidence, people can smell that a mile away, and it's really hard to advance anything that you're trying to do if you don't know who you are and if you can't explain your why.
I swear I didn't give her my syllabus. 3, just one thing that they should do to get that dream job by a young age like you.
Okay. Well, do it when you're ready and when you want to do it, because there are a lot of things you got to take into consideration. You have family and other aspirations. One thing I will say, and I'll go back to answer the question, because I always say this, especially, and I did not start out as like a women, women empowerment or activist or anything like that. But of course, as I have, ascended in my role, people have me come talk to groups, in particular women, all the time. The one thing that I say is, like, you can do it all. Like, don't let people tell you you can't. There are trade-offs. Men and women have to make trade-offs when you do this. But I remember my parents working, and there were times where one had to go to work and another one came in and the other one went out the door, and there are trade-offs. But one of the things that I've been able to do to make sure that I am a good CEO and also a good mom is, like, every day I make a decision. And some days I'm going to be a great mom and not the best CEO, and some days I'm going to be a great CEO and not the best mom. And you make those trade-offs. But one thing I learned early is you're going to piss somebody off every day. So just make a decision about who that is and make sure there's balance. But I say that because there's some young people in here, and I know that there are probably some women who are like, well, I got to do this first, I got to do that. And, sometimes when you're ticking all those things off, you can look up and you're 40 and you haven't done all the things that you want to do. So do it on your timetable. You don't have to do it on my timetable or anyone else's, but do it when it works for you. But don't be afraid to do it. Like, you can do it. And like I said, my daughter, she's so proud of me. I was telling somebody earlier, she's like super woke. She knows what her mom is doing. I told her I was coming here today, and that's a sacrifice, but you can do it. And so I just feel like that's an important message. As far as like what to do to land your job, like find a place where you think you can add the most value. Period. And if you really show up with a plan to add value, I think things fall into place in a natural way. So don't look for the biggest district or the hottest district or the one that everybody's talking about. Find a place where you will be able to do your best work, and find the place where you can add the most value. And I think that will become your dream job. And I say this not because I'm sitting on this panel. This is real life. I love what I do. I wake up every day. It is not hard to get up and do this every day. And I want that for everybody. So I hope you find a place where you can give 120% and enjoy doing that, because it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had asked her in a brief conversation that we had, I said, Dr. Jackson, if you had a redo about taking this job, would you? And I expected some, well, on the one hand, on the other. She said, absolutely. This is my dream job. So that's wonderful. Last question. What keeps you strong while doing this work? What keeps you going, sustains you, especially during the difficult times? Because there are always going to be difficult times.
Two things. First, the kids. And that's real life. I know people say that sometimes they don't really believe it, but just like when I was a principal, when things would be tough, I would go in the classroom and just watch, even if they were acting up or not do it. It's just that joy. When we lose that in the work, when you forget why you're doing this, it's hard. The work is hard then. So the students, I know why I do this. I'm doing it for people like me, people who aren't like me, but people who want an opportunity, and anything I can do to put them on that path is the reason, is my why. And then my faith in God. I mean, everybody comes at this in a different place, but I was joking. Somebody sent me an encouraging text, and I told them I really believe the scripture, no weapons formed. So I'm not just saying I'm okay. I'm okay. And I believe that if you do things for the right reason, people, that know me, they know my heart. And I do this work, and I'm not trying to sound like a missionary, because that is not what I am. But I really believe that I'm doing the work that I was put on this earth to do. Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm.
I want to invite people to the mic, but you need to hear these instructions. If you come to the mic to ask Dr. Jackson a question, it has to be a question. It has to be a statement with a question mark at the end. It must be succinct, so other than your name, if you would get right to the question, we'll be able to have her answer quite a few. And the first person that goes is modeling the way. So, sir, I'm counting on you.
Teacher.
I'm counting on you to model the way, meaning question. Okay. Tell us your name, though.
Thank you for coming tonight. I wonder, would you give us your advice as a leader for how to set high expectations and encourage them and enforce them when you have a student population that may not have been ever encouraged to dream or to think that way?
Well,
my caveat is that I'm asking this due to my own failure in 15 years at Bunker Hill Community College, where I was thrown under the bus from my first day to my last, saying you have no business putting those ideas in their heads.
Yeah. Well, I think the culture of low expectations is probably the biggest impediment to academic advancement, especially for low income and minority students. So I think high expectations are critically important. I do want to explain what I mean when I say high expectations. My philosophy is high expectations coupled with high levels of support. I think when you do one without the other, you set students up for failure. I've seen these kind of high expectations, zero tolerance, no excuses models. I don't agree with those. Personally, there's some value in the model, but it needs to be tweaked. But I've also seen models where it's all support, support, support. You're not teaching them anything, and when they turn 18, the whirl happens. And so for me, you have to couple high expectations with support. I think that whenever I have had an opportunity to visit or learn about a school that is beating the odds, so to speak, in every single case, there is a phenomenal leader and they believe in high expectations and actually believe in students. But I think it all comes with the framing. I think all students are the same. I don't care what background they're from. It's how many adults do they have in their corner telling them they can be successful and also supporting them to be successful, because most of the students, I'm not familiar with Bunker Hill, but just drawing on my experience, most of the students who come from challenging backgrounds, they get 20 times more messages about what they can't do than they get about what they can do. And so sometimes we're in the classroom, you have to, overcompensate and account for that. And so that's how I approach it. But if you talk to people who worked in schools that I led, they will tell you I have the market cornered on high expectations, but I also believe in supporting people.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Jackson. I have
Hello.
a quick statement, DJS. So I'm a Chicago South Side girl who left the city 20 years ago and would have never dreamed that I would graduate with a doctorate from Harvard. But I'm back in Chicago 20 years later, and so to hear what you're doing is amazing.
Yeah.
Because it was very difficult to navigate that system.
Yep.
So now I spend most of my time coaching leaders and really helping them
didn't
show
tell
up
her
in
who
their
you
full
are.
self.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things you're doing in CPS to work with the school building leaders, not only on building their own leadership, but also how do you navigate the politics within the school district?
Well, I mean, I can talk about that forever, but what I should have said, I highlighted it a little bit in my remarks, is that part of our theory of change has focused on the school as the local unit of change, which means the principal is the CEO of their building. And so we believe in CPS that if we have 660 schools, 30,000 teachers and employees, you can't manage and hire for that at the district level. And we can hire 660 good principals and have them create the conditions within their schools that drive towards the type of success that we're looking for. And that's the bet we made 15 years ago, and that's been the process that we've used to date. We have programs across the board for new principals to support them through this, because that's the hardest part in the journey. But also, I'm really proud of the work that we've done to retain the principals that we have and to honor our high-performing principals and principals that have been in the district for a long time. And I talked earlier about some of the programs that we offer. But one data point that I would share with you is when we first embarked on the principal retention work, our departure rate each year was about 30%, which means at the end of each year, 30% of the principals left. Last year, it was less than 10%. It was 9%. And so that is remarkable for a large urban school system. And one of the things I believe is that if we keep stability and leadership there and stability in the teaching core, it's going to transform into better outcomes for our kids. And so we do a lot. There's always room to grow. We have recently launched a diversity program called Great Expectations Mentoring to really identify Black and Latinx leaders in our district to prepare them. And part of it is just the work. What are the competencies that you need to master in order to get whatever job you're trying to get in a leadership role? But then we also talk to them about what's your specific experience, because we have found that, like, for many of our African American male leaders, there's a separate cohort. They feel like they're only given opportunities to work in low income or hard schools to go in and kind of be disciplinarians and clean things up. And we also learned from a lot of our Latinx leaders that there is a lot of pressure and responsibility to work specifically with your own community. And so how do we break that down and help them understand what the culture and expectations are, but also what are the opportunities in the district and when is it okay to step outside of those things? So those are just a few examples of how we work with our leaders to put them on the path and put them in a school that fits best for them, hoping that that means they'll stay for the long term.
Mm-hmm. And that's Dr. Anise Fisher.
Nice to meet you, Doc.
Okay.
So you talked about the problem of under-enrollment, and meanwhile you have these really large facilities that are intended for more young people. And I know your equity office is working on poverty kind of head-on and thinking about wraparound services.
Yeah.
Have you thought about co-locating services in these larger facilities, and what do you think about like full-service community schools and implementing that sort of model?
Yeah, great question. So to answer the first part, we do have a few models where we have services, whether it's a health clinic or other services that are co-located in a building. We actually have more facilities and more space than kind of we can solve for with that kind of a model. One of the things that we attempted to do when we closed the 50 schools, of course, we had a lot of facilities on hand. I mean, that number is much smaller now. I think it's about 9 that we still have on our books. But we did look for communities and churches to take them over. But what we found is schools are so big, the utility cost alone, the average CBO cannot sustain it. And so we've just been trying to figure out other creative ways to use those facilities in the district. And then you asked another
Full
question.
service community schools.
And we agree with that. Of the 660 schools in CPS, I think around 200 of them are community schools. We have different models. We have some that were part of the original 21st Century Community Schools grant. And then we also have a model with just 20 schools that is in partnership with the Chicago Teachers Union, which is more robust, I would say, and schools get additional resources, and those have been really effective. A lot of our community-based organizations feel really connected. We invited in some of the people who were sometimes on the other side of the table, and I think it's gone a long way to really bring together that synergy between the school and the community-based partners.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Jackson, it's really refreshing, like as a former CFO, to hear how resources are being aligned with like values of equity.
Yeah.
And you're kind of putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Thank
Right? It makes me think about, you've done a lot of things in terms of curriculum. I know CPS has student-based budgeting. You talked about facilities. What is next in terms of investment, especially around low-income communities where there are a lot of Black and brown kids?
So a couple of things is actually a really good question. What's next is we are trying to create a formula for our budget that is more aligned with EBF, evidence-based funding. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that concept, but the state of Illinois has adopted EBF, which is great. It led to more funding for CPS, as I mentioned in my remarks. But as a school system, right now about 52% of the funds that a school receives are directly related to student-based budgeting. The other 48% come through a variety of sources, special ed, EL services, and some citywide services that we administer centrally and push out to schools. And so one of the things that we would like to do is to make sure there's better alignment between the evidence-based funding formula and how we distribute dollars in CPS. And so we are in the process of starting an 18-month long process where we're going to engage the community, go out with our best thinking around budget models, get feedback. But really, part of it is to educate the community on the funding policy, but also get their feedback. But what we're also hoping to do is to really bring about awareness around the fact that we shouldn't really debate student-based funding versus resource allocation. If you're trying to slice the same pie, you're going to get the same outcomes, the haves and the have-nots. That's what's going to happen. And in addition to looking at how we allocate funds, collectively, I want to rally people in order for us to change Illinois' ranking as 50 out of 50 for public education funding, because our adequacy level right now is 62%. If we were funded at 100% adequacy, this is the state's formula, we would have an additional $2 billion in our budget. And if we had an additional $2 billion, gone are the debates over should we have a nurse in every school, should we have the money would be there. It's just not there. And so we need more investment in public education. So that's what's on the horizon. I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot about it once we start talking publicly.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Diversifying the teaching force is a big part of your 5-year vision.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, what is the strategy for recruiting and inspiring a more diverse teaching force?
Yeah.
Particularly with declining student enrollment or student population in communities of color?
Yeah, one program I didn't mention earlier when I was speaking to your cohort is we've actually created a residency program at CPS that I'm really happy about. The first year, so basically what we've done is we looked at our teacher assistants and special education classroom assistants. There were about 2,000 individuals that already had bachelor's degrees working in those positions. And so CPS created a program where we would pay for them to go back to school to get their certification in early childhood education, special education, some of our hard to staff areas. And then they could also student teach, which until recently in Illinois, you could not student teach and get paid, but that just changed. So we worked to change legislation there so they can keep their pay and they can get paid to student teach, which is important for a person who's employed. They can't stop and go student teach for 6 months. And so the first year we had about 60 people who completed that program, and this year we have over 100 in that cohort, and really we expect to have close to 300 annually once that program reaches full capacity. And so that's an example of a program where I felt like the solution or part of the solution was right there. And it took us a while as a school system to do it, and we'll be able to produce hundreds of teachers. And what I did mention earlier is many of those people are Black and Latinx, because they are many of our classroom teachers. So that's one in addition to all the other things that many districts are trying to do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Jackson, your work in Chicago is actually very impressive. One of the things I noticed was how, thanks to you, the graduation rate in CPS has actually increased from like 56% to like 78% in just about 8 years. But what I was wondering is, would you consider taking your work outside of Chicago? Because I noticed in one of your slides that it actually shows how the CPS compares to other public schools across the state. I mean, across the nation.
Yeah.
I also noticed that Baltimore was actually very low, like way down below New York and Chicago. Would you consider reaching out to other school systems like them?
Well, I do work with it. First of all, I think I think they have a great superintendent in Baltimore who I do work with.
Maybe that came out wrong. I apologize.
Yeah. Okay. No. It's a great question. But I do. And coming to events like this, I do a lot of collaboration. And we learn a lot because we haven't figured everything out. But I do know that I'm not personally responsible for the graduation improvements, although I love the way you gave me credit for all that work. But what I want people to learn from that is it is a concerted effort. The schools, our counselors really organize themselves around this challenge. And so the data that you see around graduation rate improvements, it wasn't like a blip or something that just happened. I was a teacher, not a teacher, a principal when we started this work. I remember when CPS said, we are going to focus on freshmen in high school. And there were people who were like, well, what about the sophomores and what about the juniors and we had to focus on one thing, and it was freshmen on track, intervening early. There were policies in place. Accountability, it was in our school accountability policy, and fast forward, 10 years later, we can post the gains that you saw here, but it started with data from the University of Chicago in a decision at the high school level that this is what we're going to focus on. And this was one example where it worked. There are a lot of examples where it doesn't work. This was one example where it actually worked. And so we have been sharing the work that we have done around Freshmen on Track across the country, and the consortium is doing a really good job, and happy to share their information with anybody who's interested in learning more about that work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, so even with the initiatives with school choice, the district is still pretty segregated. And so I was wondering if you have any reflections on the merger of Ogden and Jenner, and whether you have plans to sort of address segregation throughout the district.
It's actually a good question. So Ogden Jenner is a really good example of the kind of thing that we would love to do more of. When we look at Chicago, and going back to my conversation around overcrowding and under-enrollment, we actually have not a lot, but we have enough communities where there are Ogden is it's merged now, but prior to the merger, Ogden was the probably wealthiest school in Chicago. That was right next to a community, the old Cabrini Green, where one of the last schools was there. It was a fairly new school because the facility was built not too long ago, but severely under-enrolled because that housing project, had been demolished and the communities had been displaced, etc. And the community, not CPS, came together with a plan to merge. And so you had this wealthy, mostly white community working with the low-income African-American community collaboratively. And it wasn't perfect, but they came up with the plan to support the merger. And to be honest, initially we were, as a district, kind of like, I don't know, is this going to work? Is this going to be, a flashpoint? And it actually worked out. And even when problems emerged, as you all could imagine would occur, they owned it because this was their plan. Mm-hmm. And so to answer your question, yes, we have to do more of those. The challenge I have is how do we do that in a way where it's authentically generated from the community and not coming from CPS? And that is a challenge because Ogden Jenner worked for a number of reasons, but we had a lot of parents who are lawyers, researchers, who could do the planning and the research. They could put together a plan that CPS had to respond to. When communities that do not have some of those human resources present, if they don't have it, it is the district's responsibility to help them do it. But sometimes because of the distrust between the district and the communities, it can become messy. And that's what happened with some of the other ones that we tried to do. So yes, I am committed to that and providing more integration. But I will say this. That is important to me, but what's more important is having good schools everywhere, because I think it's just as terrific that the kids in Inglewood, which is almost all black, that they have a good school in their community. And I'm fine if the school is all black, as long as the school is getting the same thing that the schools on the north side and other parts of the city are getting. So if people want diversity and seek that out, we need to make that easier. But I also think we have to have good schools in black and Latino communities, because I know when I was growing up, I felt like you had to go to school in a non-black community to get a good education, and that's not true. And we have to make sure that we have more great school options, that people feel good about the options in their community.
Thank you. Thank you. Good. We're coming to the end, and you'll be the last.
Stand on my tippy toes. Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for coming out here and sharing your story with us. Very powerful. My question to you is, with Chicago having one of the largest immigrant student populations in our country, what supports do you have in your school to support the students and families, given all of the recent tragic events with ICE and the recent shooting in El Paso, Texas?
Well, I think CPS has always been centered on CPS Chicago as a welcoming city. We are a sanctuary city. And as I stated earlier, most people probably didn't know that Chicago was one of the most sought out destinations for people immigrating to America. And so with, the national politics around that, we've seen fewer people coming to Chicago, coming to America in general. And so that's something that we've had to address. But we, as a school system, I think our bilingual education policy is one of the strongest. That was actually one of the first policies that I implemented as the chief ed officer. And I remember when I came in, the gentleman who ran the department came to me and said, we have been trying to revise the bilingual education policy for however many years, and we can't do it. And I said, why? And then he explained the politics. There's some people who think dual language is bad and whatever it was, but they came to us with the policy. We had the support of our parents, and we adopted that policy where we strengthened our bilingual programs. We also expanded dual language programs throughout the city, respecting the language and culture that our students bring to the table. And very soon there's going to be a report about the quality of our EL programs, which we think it's going to show that a lot of that is working. So I think on the educational front, that has been really good. We haven't had a lot of what we've seen in some other districts with regard to ICE and things like that. I mean, we've made it clear where we stand as a school system. And so it's, I think, publicly making sure people know their rights. We've done a lot around the Know Your Rights campaign, so that if people are faced with that outside of school, our police doesn't work with ICE on those things, and CPS doesn't work with ICE. And so we've made that clear. And then the last thing that we're working on that we don't have an official newcomers policy or newcomer schools that I've seen in other school districts. So that's something that we're working on and looking to bring to CPS. I think it happens naturally. There are places in our city where people naturally go because of family connections and other things. But I think we can make it easier for people who move into the city to know where to go. So that's what's on the horizon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you have the last word?
Okay. Hi, Dr.
Hello.
Jackson. My name is Naja Turner, and I was born and raised in Freeport, Illinois, so not very far from Chicago.
Okay.
So thank you again for coming out and showing out and sharing your true self with us.
Thank you.
My question, it's kind of a two-part question, but given what you kind of talked about in terms of like students and the trauma that they're experiencing, I'm wondering what you all or CPS is doing to help support teachers who are experiencing like burnout and vicarious trauma working with these students. And similarly, what do you think it would take to have like entire health and wellness centers with like full staff clinicians in schools, district-wide and nationally?
A lot of money for the last part. But, if the money's there, I think it makes a lot of sense. So we have prioritized social and emotional learning as a district for about the past 6 or 7 years now. And I was speaking earlier, I would say tier 1 is pretty solid in CPS. People understand what SEL means. The district has been committed. Even during our financial crisis, we did not cut SEL supports and services or the SEL department. But I think Tier 1 is okay. Tier 2 and Tier 3, definitely we need a lot of support. We need more clinicians in the schools to support. And we also need to make the bridge easier from schools to other agencies when kids need more support than the schools can provide. I remember being a principal and feeling like I couldn't solve problems once it got to a certain point. And it was really hard, even when children or families had insurance, and a lot of our families don't. And so helping them get access is really difficult. As far as teachers, I actually was just advocating. We received a health and healing trauma grant. Is that the call? The grant from the federal government, which was a 1-year grant, and we saw tremendous progress as a result of it, and it allowed us to address some of the things that you brought up in your question. And so I had an opportunity to go and speak and advocate for more funding like that, because we absolutely need it. The secondary trauma that you brought up is probably the biggest issue outside of access to clinicians and healthcare professionals. Our teachers are saying something's different. And when I talk to teachers and principals, I ask them, and it cuts across race. It's not like, the white teachers who don't have experience working in black communities are saying it's across the board. People feel stressed. They feel like it's a lot. Kids are coming in and they've been exposed to so much. And we have to figure out how to take care of the teachers and address that, or we're going to continue to see burnout and turnover, which is a huge turnover is something that we are still grappling with, teacher turnover in CPS. And so I think that's probably the next big thing on the horizon, supporting that tier 2 and tier 3, and also supporting our teachers who, are dealing with the effects of secondary trauma. Yeah, so stay tuned. That is something we haven't tackled yet, but it's on the radar.
Thank you. 2 things in closing. Number 1, I want to thank the audience for actually asking questions.
That was good.
You all did a great job. You did a great job.
I don't know what normally goes on here.
They stand there and they pontificate.
Oh, okay.
The second thing that I want to say is to you, Dr. Jackson. I've been doing this work a long time. And I am not easily impressed.
Oh, thank you.
I am rarely bowled over. But
thank you.
I have so enjoyed hearing you tonight and knowing what you are embarking upon.
Thank you. Oh, gosh. You are sufficiently embarrassed now. Woo. Thank you.
Now I'm embarrassed.
It's a good embarrassment. I think it is wonderful that a little girl from the south side of Chicago, as somebody said, has showed up and is showing out and letting not just the people here at HGSE or in Chicago or in Illinois, but across this nation that it can be done.
It can be done.
And it can be done by someone like you.
Thank you.
So I'm just keeping this seat warm a little while longer. But anyway, I thank you. Some of y'all heard me.
Oh, Lord.
I am, on behalf of this wonderful assemblage and all of us at HGSE, thank you so much for coming, and please come back soon.
Thank you, everybody. All right.